Hello everyone, I'm Mike Sanborn. I'd like to talk about mission integrity, which is the main topic of a book I recently published called A Cop in a Small City, Examining Mission and Integrity. So my purpose for this, in the writing of the book and this slide presentation, is to support law enforcement agencies in their continuing development of ethical and moral cultures. So to provide information and expectations for citizens interacting with law enforcement, and generally encourage respectful interactions for all people. And this slide is just the beginning. So just a little bit about my credentials. I grew up powerfully influenced by my grandparents and their religious principles. I learned much in my high school science about credibility and reporting. I went to 3 colleges. St. Michael's College, where I got a bachelor's degree. It was an excellent college, Catholic college. I was a science major, so again, data, accurate reporting, and accurately analyzing information is the thrust of that education. I attended Pepperdine University, where I got a master's degree in human resources, learned much about human development and human relationships. Antioch University is where I continued my science education and learned even more about properly reporting, researching, and handling data accurately. Also, I had commissioned military service. I was an artillery officer. From there, I was a police officer for the city of Claremont for 6.5 years. I did corrections at Sullivan County. I also did 6.5 years in city administration in the Public Works Department. I've been a science teacher for decades. And I'm also, as I mentioned earlier, the publisher of a book. And this is the website to the book. So mission is, definitions can be varied and not apply in every situation. So this is straight out of dictionary.com, and my style when I teach is to show the general definitions and then call out what particularly part of that definition that applies to what I'm teaching. So in this case, a mission is a business with which a group is charged. An important goal or purpose that is accompanied by a strong conviction. Those are what I think apply most to a police mission. Okay, so a law enforcement mission now, that's a little bit harder to identify. So it's easy to say law enforcement, we enforce the laws. But there's an awful lot of officer discretion. You don't have to write a ticket because they roll through a stop sign. You can warn them. You can let them go. And if they do it again, then you can enforce it if you want. So also, enforcing the law can actually do more harm than good. So an example there is a high-speed chase. You know it's a stolen car, so it's automatically it's a felony. So on a felon, you got a lot of authority and apprehending this person. But if they're traveling at 95 miles an hour in a 40-mile-an-hour zone, and they're all over the road, including on the wrong side around corners, they may actually be presenting more harm to the public than it's worth catching them. Tough decisions to make, and split-second decisions. Okay, so the goal isn't always necessarily to make the arrest, which is to take them into the custody and to the charge, answer the charge in the court system. Sometimes you can negotiate, divert, don't always have to have the arrest. But keep in mind that we're to protect the public and maintain order, and here again, we may all have a different concept of what order means. We also might, as a police officer, make referrals to other human services. And ultimately, I heard a favorite phrase of mine was, police work is not social work. Well, yes, it is. So the collective mission of the police is to affect social reform. So it's a cumulative effect of the police officer doing the mission will have an effect on the community. So integrity now. So it's adherence to moral and ethical principles. So soundness of character. This is something, personal integrity was paramount as a military officer. State of being whole, unimpaired. So we can also talk about the integrity of objects. So the integrity of a bridge. You don't want the bridge to fall down, so you want it to be integrity. Well, you can apply that same sort of mechanical thought to your own personal and moral principles. Because if there's weakness in it and your personal integrity crumbles, so is your character and any testimony, your credibility, all tied into that personal integrity. My definitions come from all from dictionary.com. So ethics. So it's a system of moral principles, rules of conduct for a particular group or an individual. And again, it's the difference between what's right and what's wrong. So that's why I put in my credentials. It goes all the way back to my childhood, but notice I didn't say I got it from my parents. It was from my grandparents. So we decide what our personal ethics are going to be. And then we align them with the group. And hopefully they are in alignment, because when your ethics conflict with the group ethics is where you run into real problems. So now, again, what's moral? That's part of the definition of ethics, right? So there's fundamentals of right and wrong that are not necessarily legal. Now, the laws carry only so much. So just because it's legal doesn't make it morally right to do. But if it's immoral, it's not necessarily illegal to bring a charge against somebody. Those are things that police officers should be constantly worried about and wondering whether it's morally right, whether it's legally right. Maybe, sometimes it's wonderful if it's both immoral and illegal, and then that decision is easy. So we got to watch out for our personal biases. So they're preconceived. They can be unreasonable too. So the feelings or opinions versus actual facts and data and interpretation of that data. So we got to be careful of our personal biases, because they can certainly influence our decisions and deviate from the law and what might be the best resolution to the situation. So I hear a lot about police officers talking about their professionalism. So of course I need to define professionalism. So professional character, spirit, or methods, the standing, practice, or methods of professional, as distinguished from an amateur. So what's a profession? So basically, a profession has its set standards of knowledge. It has to be learned, and it applies to vocation or business. So basically, special skills to earn money. Now, I want to point out, we also talk about professional criminals. So this definition of police doing things with utmost professionalism, well, there's that professionalism within the criminal thought too. So just being professionalism, I hear a lot. It's just something that bothers me that police say about doing utmost professionalism. No, are you morally, ethically, personal integrity? That's what I'm looking for, not necessarily professionalism. It just means you get paid to do something. So then there are the codes. So there's this code of ethics that hopefully the police departments have. How not to get involved in financial affairs that conflict with your job and things like that. But it's also a brevity or secrecy of communication. So there's some arbitrary and there's some forthright stuff. There's some things that are behind the scenes. And one of them is the rat. Now, of course, being a science guy, I had to put in the definition of a rat. But also, to get into the slang, rat is scoundrel. But the criminal thought is to desert one's own party or associate, so you don't rat on other criminals, right? They turned into an informer. But I have, in my 6.5 years in the police, found officers being called rats that spoke about something that another officer should not have done. So I always wondered about that, is that, where's the ethical lines between the criminal rat and the police officer rat? So in the book, I have many, many different scenarios, and I evaluate them afterwards. But just to give you some thoughts about, and hopefully you take your time to read my book. But Officer Kent and Benny, he wrote Benny up for speeding. Benny wasn't speeding. Benny was dating his sister. Officer Grant and Mitch. Officer Grant, Mitch, was a convicted felon, and He was a tough guy to handle, especially when he was drinking, but Officer Grant handled him much too rough and hurt him seriously. And a few years later, I found Mitch with a gun. Now, that's easy, right? Felon with a gun? Well, there's more to the story than that. Sometimes not making the arrest solves a better problem. Sending him back to jail for 6 years probably would not have solved the problem that he was trying to solve at the time. The gun wasn't being used in a crime. He just happened to have it in his possession. So then there's this dispatcher, excellent dispatcher. He was great, but I caught him with Sam. It was an inappropriate relationship. I reported him to the chief, and the chief says what he does on his time is not our problem. Well, later on, Gary was arrested for sexual assault in another town. Why didn't we act on that? So officers Martin and Jakin at a freelancers party. Freelancers were a motorcycle club. They had a reputation for being a rough crowd. That's why we had to have 3 officers there. Martin and Jacob showed up late, but they put their time down for the whole time that they were there. So basically, they were trying to get paid for time they weren't there. Freelancers didn't like it, and they complained about that. And I got stuck in the middle of that one. Caught a state trooper going through my town, and he was just headed to work in a 30-mile-an-hour zone at 65 miles an hour. How would you handle that? Then there's a police officer from the neighboring town speeding through my neighborhood when I just got back on duty from stopping for lunch. Considerably over the speed limit, flashed the badge at me. Again, what would you do? Then I had Jake and Tom. A trooper was chasing a motorcycle. We got the motorcycle stopped. Then these guys show up and with guns drawn and blaring, and again, excessive display of force that was not necessary. So again, what would you do in that situation? So basically, here's the big long reference. Notice I have my reference here of organizational development, which is what I'm trying to put forth to police. Is that I hope that people read my book and they look at that and you see what's going on within the department and how to improve upon it. So to do that, I highlighted some things, and necessary here is to expand the candidness. Be honest about what's going on. We don't all do things perfectly. There's no way. To take greater responsibility for what we do and new ways of working together. So society is evolving. We need to evolve with it. So our goals are going to change. The methods of operations are going to change. Our openness is definitely being more and more demanded by the public. So to summarize it, there are no clear definitions to what the job is, what the terms are being used for the job. Your mission can actually have straight up conflicts in it. Personal integrity matters most. So always, always never lie, never exaggerate. Just report it as it is. And if you read my book, I hope I have modeled for you the description of the scenes and the events in a regular report type format. And again, of course, I'm not immune to it, and I address my own feelings of what's going on during those times. And an organization is defined by the collective integrity of its members. So if you got a bad cop, it makes the whole department look bad. So police yourselves. So integrity, ethics, morality, and service are some of the concepts that define an institution and must be regularly reviewed and revised as society evolves. So even though you thought you cleaned house and you're looking good, go back every now and then and keep the communication lines going. And then for yourselves, practice self-care. So healthy activities to relieve stress. And be careful, very, very careful about involving alcohol. Keep those positive connections. They can be your family, your friends, and they must be outside the organization. If your friends are the ones you work with, find additional friends. Get connected with some social service, or some volunteer, or somehow get something outside the department you work in. And then find an effective mentor. Now I say effective mentor because it can't be your supervisor. So what if your supervisor has the flaws? Common thing in it, is that somebody complains, how do these officers get away with it? You know, there was somebody reported them. Well, their supervisor probably did the same thing. So find somebody, especially I'm talking about police administrators too, is that you want somebody from outside your department looking in your department and bypassing that chain of command, and then trying to get those alternative communication lines open. If it's just simply this chain of command, your organization is not going to change.